So let's go ahead and record it. What I'd like to do is share some analysis that I just did this afternoon. Um, Here we go. Oops. Did my Word document? No, I don't want that. I wanted the easier to get the stop the share. Let's figure out. That's what I want. So if I can share that. Okay. So must be, well, there we go. There we go. Okay. What I've done, something I came across a while ago. I'm looking at how fast can we transition away from fossil fuels, and how fast can we transition into
Mm.
uh, solar and wind, right? We're going gangbusters right now. We're doing a whole lot in theory. The question is how fast we can do that. And try not showing that up here. If I get this to the side. Okay. So what I did a couple of months ago, I happened to be looking at our world in data and came up with this graph of found the data on total primary energy, terawatt hours, whatever that's what it means. And I said, okay, here's this total. It's been going up nice and steadily for the last 70 years, 50 years. So we could probably assume that's going up the same. And if you look at break it up into um, the fossil fuel energy, uh, solar and wind, and all other, you get this nice little graph that says others going the same way. And oh yeah, the energy from solar and wind is now an accelerating curve, growing maybe 12 annual growth rate of 12% a year. It's now 6% of the energy. So okay, that looks good. Maybe what happens if we continue solar and continue it growing apace? So what you can do, I may have talked about this before, but I got some more insight now. So if we assume that total energy is going to go up linearly through 2100, like these things show, and then solar and wind are going to go exponential. So over between now and 2050, I've got the other stuff going up slowly. It's saying the same amount. Solar, the total going up the same place, and the solar and wind growing exponentially, and the fossil fuels are going to make up the difference. So, okay, that looks like a good idea. So maybe if we keep solar keeps growing fast enough, we'll replace all the fossil fuels with solar. Um, I looked around at a couple of sources. It says, yeah, we're doing a combined annual growth rate of 6, 8, 10%, somewhere in that range. So I said, what happens that what I've got, continue with this growth rate. I'm going to assume that fossil fuels always be at least 3% of the total. We're not going to get rid of all fossil fuels, but we got to keep some around. So maybe 3% of this total energy is going to be from fossil fuels. So what happens with the combined annual growth rate? Well, I start off here, I'm accelerating up. All of a sudden, whoops, this is all the primary energy that I need from fossil fuels. And so all of a sudden I come up here, it's oops, I'm done, I've accelerated. Now what do I do? And my CO2 emissions sort of go up, keep going up a little bit, all of a sudden go down to slowly go down, all of a sudden they hit zero and they just hit zero cycle, sudden kaplop. And if you look at that, here's one 12% annual growth rate, primary energy going up straight, solar going this way, and all of a sudden leveling off, and coal going this way. And you look at how much was added annually, and you can see here's how much I added annually, and all of a sudden, oops, I hit this amount, and now I drop almost down. What in a global market economy, what what organization or company is ever going to grow and continue to double and quadruple whatever the stuff, hit a peak and they say, oops, I don't need it anymore. I'm going to throw all my production facilities away. So I don't think when people talk about how fast solar is going to take off, they don't think about the long range that says, gee, if I hit a peak, I really got to smooth that out. I've got to go more smoothly as I replace my fossil fuels. And I tried that for once very roughly. That says, okay, if I can add this capacity every year, then I'll have a more gentle, fossil fuels. Solar goes up a little bit more slowly. Fossil fuels go down more evenly. And even this is not a very. This should be a lot smoother. I'm not an economist. I don't have the tools to figure out, well, what's a good glide path from where I am now and where I'm going to be going in 70 years, so I can sort of even it out. And this is sort of the instead of these curves going down, I have a more gradual decline in fossil fuels. So what's that saying is that the idea of getting 50% reduction or replacing 50% of fossil fuels by 2050 just doesn't make sense, because you do that and all of a sudden you're going to be hitting up, you have so much capacity for generating windmills, wind turbines, and solar panels that you fall off a cliff, and no one's going to produce. So we need a more gentle, even though maybe going at 12% now, we need a more gentle glide path for replacement.
So you're talking about solar saturation at that point where it goes up and then it drops back down. So you
Yeah,
build it up until the point where when it's sunny and windy, the solar and the wind are producing enough electricity to satisfy all of demand. So if you build more solar and more wind, then you just start dumping the electricity. Is that what that is?
right. That's what happens here. I got all this excess, and what am I going to do with all that excess?
Yeah, so
I
that's
don't
the
need
term for
anymore.
that is solar saturation and wind saturation. So then they stop building solar power and they stop building wind power according to
Right.
the models.
But I'm going to.
No, guys, I think though, aren't these two different things? Glenn, that's the saturation that you have too much during the day, right? And you can't use it all and so on. Isn't this is more the long term?
Right. This
And
is
Bruce, my question here is this is this capacity for something where the capacity factor is low,
well.
right?
This is
Or
this is
or
this is simply how much of the primary energy is comes from various sources. So I
yeah,
don't care about
okay,
capacity factor. I just care about total energy.
okay. Well, but if you're getting whatever number of terawatt hours you're getting out of wind and solar, your capacity is six times that, let's say, or
Right.
something. So
Yeah.
does this growth rate is this the growth rate of capacity or is it the growth rate of energy?
Should be the same. So I certain capacity produces a certain amount of energy. So this is really energy.
No, but I can't.
Once
No,
once
I need more megawatts of installed capacity of solar. I need whatever the number is. Call it the factor of 10 to get. I need 10 megawatts to average 1 megawatt over the year. 1 megawatt times 8,600 hours.
Yeah,
Right.
this is terawatt hours. This is how many terawatt hours I have of solar.
Okay, I understand, but I just want to make sure that when we talk about is that kind of a growth rate?
Or is that solar with battery electric storage, I would assume.
Just solar. I don't care. Just
Sure.
solar. Period.
Just
Solar. Period. But the question, the thing is though, if I'm keep adding and adding to my solar capacity to sort of as my compound annual growth rate, I got to 2047 or 2048, and all of a sudden I find, oh, I don't have anything to do with I built this capacity to add every year. I'm adding this much per
Right,
year.
right.
And all of a sudden, the next year, so in 2047, I need 20,000 units, and in 2049, I need 5,000 units.
Where do you get this calculation where 2048 is hitting saturation?
Because I've got saturation comes because my primary energy, that's the total I need.
Yeah.
And that's how much is coming from solar.
Bruce,
well,
Yeah.
Bruce, can you hear me?
Yeah, John. Okay, actually, yeah, John, yeah.
Okay, so look, you've in this kind of modeling, I love it. I do it all the time. So I totally appreciate it, but I also don't agree with some aspect of it. And one of the things is you just assume an exponential untrammeled growth. I mean, that's cool for something, but in many situations, there's something called, I think it's called the logistic equation, where as you're approaching a saturation, there's less pull, maybe there's less good land available, maybe all kinds of things happen. So it drops off naturally.
Absolutely. What I'm trying to say is that this exponential growth is not uh, uh, capitalistically viable. I need a logistics curve. And then with the logistics curve that says, because I have to do a logistics curve, I'm not going to replace my solar that quickly. I mean, I'm not going to replace fossil fuels like go to like hit net zero in 2050. I just not going to do.
And, and Bruce, I think there's a counter argument. There's a book that I've read a review of. Have people seen a book called Overshoot, written by some Swedes? I've read a review of it, but I think their argument would also be that we're destroying the capital investment in fossil fuels at a tremendous rate that would lead to bad things economically.
Well, this says has nothing to do with that, although some response. But this says that I can't bring fossil fuels can't go at a continually and constant annual growth rate. At some point, it's got to even up. My growth rate's got to be more even because of the logistics curve. I can't. I said even this fun one that I did for trying to, I don't know, I just try to play around and try to go with something which is more even. What the problem is, I need to, this is my reply, this is where I need to be out in 2090. That's my replacement, that's my continued growth. And how do I get from here to here and get the capacity that I need? And I'm just saying that when people talk about how fast I can replace fossil fuels, it ain't going to be very fast.
So, you mind if I do screen share for a moment?
One quick sec. Let me show you. This other thing it says is as I'm replacing fossil fuels, I mean, with solar, and these are my various growth rates. This is how I can replace it. In 2035. My emissions probably won't have changed much. When I get to 2050 or 2040, I may be down 5%. But this is probably the best I can do as far as converting from fossil fuels to solar is to have my CO2 emissions only be down to 30 gigatons a year, about 20% by 2050. This sort of says net zero it can't happen. That was primarily it. So let me again, I just want to talk about that to get the reactions. Is this right? Is this wrong? Does it make sense? Because people talk about how fast I can how cheap solar and wind are. So I got to put more of them in. You can't go that fast. And what I've got here also just quickly, I then took that same thing and said, okay, let me take how fast I'm going to grow, look at my temperature increase, and so okay, it's modified version. I go from 81.9 degrees in 2040 so by 2100, I'm not going to have my temperature is not going to be pretty much unchanged. So this is where we end up with that curve that says, look, at 2040, I'm going to be at 2 degrees in 2100. And then anyway, got other stuff on there. Okay, so again, I just want I'll send the PDF around for all your interest.
Bruce, if I could just come back to the fossil fuel side, right? I think the argument I'm making is it does the same thing as you're concerned that your renewables curve goes up and you've got all this capacity to build that right. You're doing the same thing. Fossil fuels are doing the same thing there, right?
Well, as fossil fuels is the one I think is trying to get this one.
I'm just saying that the whole fossil fuel industry has exactly the same crash.
Right, but it's not crashing
anymore. You don't need all those refineries. You don't need all that investment. You don't need.
Right, but you still need some because you still have fossil fuels out there.
You do. But I'm just saying this. There's the mirror image of your concern is the banks and the fossil fuel companies.
Well, but what I'm trying to say, if the solar goes up that fast, and then the solar and the fossil fuels come down accordingly, we're going to still be at 2 degrees in 2100.
Sure.
Yeah, but Bruce,
it's a disastrous scenario for both industries, though.
Yeah, and people don't realize
Bruce,
that.
Look, okay. I'm sorry, Bruce. I asked you a few weeks ago what your model said if you would cut CO2 emissions to zero by 2050. and you said, oh, the prediction of the temperature is thus and such. I don't know, 1.6 or whatever it was. I'm sorry if I don't remember.
Yeah.
But if we say, look, it's catastrophic if we don't stop the temperature rise, then go ahead, have a growth rate of 15%. I don't see why you're saying it's impossible. You're just saying that it's not in somebody's interest.
It's not economically viable. We deal
For who?
with
Well, for
economics.
who? No. For me,
Yeah.
why is it not economically viable for me?
We live in a capitalistic system.
Well,
What manufacturer of it's a simple matter of money. Are we willing to pay enough to stop climate change?
Yeah, and maybe that's not too much. That's the question.
Oh, the question is it's billions of dollars.
Yeah, but the
Replacement
of all current fossil fuel infrastructure as it ages is trillions of dollars.
Yeah. But I'm sort of think of how do you what I haven't added in yet is what I want to do is someplace that's solar past fossil fuels. Oh, the only way you could do this if you want to decarbonize more quickly is to hugely overbuild solar capacity for trillions of dollars. And then in 2050 throw it away.
well, you have service parts. Let's not forget that. I mean, you've had some installed capacity, and solar only, I don't know what the life expectancy is now, but it's 20 to 25 years.
Right. Yeah.
So you do have service parts, go back to 25 and 30, and you're going to replace those.
Right.
So yeah, that needs to get added.
Fraction.
No, I understand that, but it's an increasing fraction over time.
Right.
Because
I didn't include that here.
Yeah. The other thing is, and this goes back, and I've spent a good part of my career doing this stuff. But when we wrote the roadmap and on, how do we get to whatever X is, we went through all this. And so I spent 18 months trying to figure out how do we take, because I, worked on all the transportation side of it. How do you really accelerate the adoption of zero carbon or very low carbon transportation and using market to do it? And because of the adoption curve, you have as you point out, a decreasing rate of increase over time. And so you can have a CAGR now of 12, but in 10 years, you can't maintain that.
Right.
For various reasons.
Right.
So that declines, that slope changes. So the only way that I can figure out how to make this work, and this problem that you're talking about here, as well as whether it's solar or looking at fossil fuel or transportation or anything else, is a mandate. And this country has done mandates before. I doubt if we can get through one now, but right now. But that is the only solution that I came up with. Now and so I understand all the market forces, and you can get into levelized cost versus cash cost and all these other things, and obsolescence. But at the end of the day, if there's no mandate, I don't know how else to make this work. And so I'll be quiet. That's my 2 cents.
Right. And if you look at, I remember back in the 1990s, early Clinton administration, they wanted to raise the tax on gasoline it was 18 cents, had not been raised for a long time. He barely got it raised by 4 cents a gallon. There's a hue and cry. People didn't want to pay it more. So it's not no. So what that means is, given all that, your choice is either you end up with temperatures probably staying above 2 degrees between now and 2100, if we're lucky, and you either have to adapt to this temperature increase, or you have to do some sort of geoengineering to bring it down. That's the place where we're in right now. Because if you throw some albedo shit, we could be up almost 2.5 degrees by 2100, because we can't decarbonize very quickly. And so again, what I'm trying to come up with is say, here's how you if you do some decarbonization, you might be able to get it back down, but people are not looking at it. That's, what's the reasonable amount of decarbonization? It takes a lot of decarbonization to hit the temperature targets, and that just ain't happening. But anyway, so what I'm just trying to say, trying to get people's arm, get my hand around, get other people's hand around is no matter how fast no matter what society does, we should expect. Like there's an article in the paper today of, oh, greenhouse gas emissions went up last year. Duh, they're going to go up for the next 10 years. We shouldn't be surprised they keep going up, even though we're doing stuff. People are not thinking that far ahead. They think, well, maybe next year they'll go down. Maybe next year they'll go down. No, they won't. We should expect emissions to be flat for a while, and then because of that feeds into the temperature increase. That says, hey, do we live with Bill Gates said? Do we live with a planet that's going to be up to 2 degrees warmer than we are right now, or do we try to and with the now that we've lost all the coral reefs and the Amazon and glaciers, what kind of world do you want to live in? Anyway,
okay. Yeah, I could add something to what you just said. If I could, oh, I'm sorry, Robert, you've got your hand up.
Okay, what I was going to throw out is again, in the early 90s, there were a series of studies that were done, first out of a group at Houston that was looking at orbitally based photovoltaics for power generation and transmission. And then another group at SRI that took a look at some of the assumptions the Houston group did. And I think your current demand curve is actually undershooting, is very conservative. The demand curve this is a sort of a back of the envelope estimate, based in the early 90s. So say 91 to 93. And it had three simple components to it: that the US and Canada essentially were going to voluntarily restrict their consumption to their level of that year, per capita.
Per capita, right.
The OECD nations were aspiring to come up to that level of what the US was doing in 1990 and wouldn't do it till around 2040. So this was a 50-year estimate. And the rest of the world, whether you look at that as 7, 8, or 9 billion people, depending on your population estimates, but since it's a per capita consumption, it's easy to adjust. They aspire to come up, the rest of the world aspires to come up to the level of consumption of Europe in the years immediately after World War II. So there's not a lot of private transportation still. There's a very modest amount of home electrification for basics like refrigerators and still not much air conditioning. And that ends up giving you a factor of 6 to 8 increase in the amount of energy demanded in 2040 versus 1990.
Yep.
And the problem is we don't know where that energy was going to come from. And the kind of global instability and national security issues that would come out of the scramble for those resources. The curves you're showing are showing like an increase of a factor of 2 or 3.
Right. Yeah.
With years. So I think they're a little too much on the conservative side. Nobody even had dreamt up things like AI data centers that were
Yeah, right. Yeah, and again, it's minor conservative, and yet the results are horrendous. It
Yes,
says that we have. That's what I'm trying to get other environmentalists to think about. We can mitigate our way out of this problem.
Well, I don't think we're going to mitigate it with that. We're going to suddenly have an overabundance of energy sources in 2050, so that production demand falls, off the table. We're still
Yeah.
going to be playing catch up, and the rest of the world is probably going to get more ambitious as they get connected into a global information society and see how the other 80% lives.
Right. Yeah. They're already seeing that. And that's the problem. Back in the COPs years ago, they thought, well, how are we going to allocate the rest of the carbon budget? And they ignored the fact that the people in the third world want to have more energy. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other, Glenn, do you have something you want to contribute, Glenn?
Sure. Yeah, if I could do screen share, I could, let's see here, share screen, send request. And let's see, share. Okay, policymakers. Okay, so the IPCC they have thousands of scientists, and then they put together reports every 5-6 years or so. And then they have these different working groups. And one of them is called working group number 3, which looks at modeling decarbonization. And they got hundreds of people working on this. And then in their report that they issued a couple of years ago, they have a summary graph right here, which is where they show the amount that you can reduce carbon dioxide emissions. This is they've got like 30 different categories, one of which is solar, shown here. And this is how much you can reduce your carbon dioxide emissions by building solar farms in terms of gigatons per year of CO2. And right now we're at about 40 gigatons of CO2 per year. So they're saying that with solar, you can build that up to saturation and reduce it about 10%. That is 4 gigatons out of 40. You can say, well, why?
What year is that chart?
So this right here is what year? This is the 6th IPCC report.
Okay.
And so this was published, they republished reports 2021, 2022, 2023. And this table here shows costs are lower than reference, meaning the solar costs less than what it's replacing. And then orange, it's $0 to $20 per ton of carbon dioxide reduced. And then they got red here is 50 to 100, and then brown is $10 to $200. And so what the hundreds of people who worked on this, and they have all sorts of, they've got thousands of pages of documentation, all these references. But anyway, this is what they came up with. And I'm not taking sides saying this number is a good number or a bad number, but this is just what they did. Now they're saying about 2 gigatons, so about 5% of total energy, the cost is less than the carbon-based approach. And then here you're looking at $10, $20 per ton. Now the reason this is 10% of energy is because approximately a third of emissions comes from electrical power generation. And with solar, the sun burns bright roughly 6 hours out of every 24, and 6 out of 24 is a quarter. So if you build up solar to saturation, you'll get about a quarter of your electricity, roughly speaking, from solar. And if you get a third of all of energy as electricity, you take a quarter times a third, you get a 12th. That number is 8%. Quarter times the third is 1/12. 1/12 is 8%. And this is about that number. It's around 10% here. Also, Chris Wright was interviewed. He's the U.S. Energy Secretary. He was interviewed about a month ago. And they asked him about solar, and he said, solar will never produce more than 10% of global energy. And this is what he was referring to, is this number here. And with wind, that's about 10% as well. And also, in their documentation, they state that these things are not additive. It looks like you can say, oh, I can get like 4 from solar and 4 from wind based on this chart. But in the fine print of their report, and they got all these reports, I've read all sorts of reports that they've done, but in the fine print, they say you can't just add these things up, but they don't necessarily accumulate. But also, you've got energy. There's things you can do with building up hydropower, solar power, etc. And then they have other stuff, and they have things like with agriculture, you can switch to eating beans instead of meat. There's all sorts of things with the lifestyle changes. Not that I'm advocating that this will happen, but anyway, this is what they put together. And also, the solar industry, it's interesting that in 2024, the cost for solar panels in the commodity markets in China dropped from 30 pennies a watt to 8 pennies a watt. So you're looking at a 3.5-fold decrease in the cost of solar panels over 12 months, which is ridiculous. And then also the cost of coal doubled. It went up to $120 per ton. So the Chinese solar farm production went way, way, way up in a very short period of time because the electricity from the solar panels from solar farms cost a lot less than the electricity from the coal-fired power plants. So they're saving money, and they're trying to clear this coal shortage. They want to get rid of the coal shortage by building more solar. So they've lurched forward. Also, they laid off 100,000 people last year from the solar industry, and 40 companies in China went out of business. And the reason is there's companies that built factories to make solar panels using techniques that are expensive, and they could not compete with the newer factories that were building solar panels using techniques that with less cost. So they have these big investment companies in China that give people money to build factories, and some of these things go out of business, and then they send the keys to the factory back to the investment company and say an envelope, and the guy in the banker gets an envelope and he shakes it and he hears the jingling and he says, "Oh, I know what that is. It's the front gate to one of those factories that we invested in." So there's a lot of that happening, and I think China will be at saturation within I think it's 3 years or so at the rate they're going. I think if they built 280 gigawatts, I think 1,000 gigawatts they hit saturation. So another 3 years or so they should hit saturation. And as far as factories, if you have a lot of factories with all this capacity and then demand drops, I don't know what to say, but the bankers, when they lend money, they have to think about how to get the money back. And so they have to deal with that. Also, if you have investment companies tied into the government and the government tells the investing company, go ahead and invest, and I don't care if you get the money back, then that's something that can happen. And Biden issued about $100 billion in loan guarantees in the last 3 months of his presidency. And I don't know how much of that money is coming back. I think his view is, I don't care if the money comes back, but usually banks do only lend if they believe that the money will come back. So they look at these things like building up and hitting saturation, and they can project emissions going off of a cliff, so to speak. So so you have this to deal with, but also you have GDP growth, which is currently 3%. So if you have 3% GDP growth over 20 years, that means GDP goes up by 80%. And if solar, let's say, is built up to saturation over 20 years, then you have an 8% reduction in CO2 emissions from the solar. So if you have 8% reduction from solar and an 80% increase from GDP growth, then your net is plus 72%. So that's why we see the carbon dioxide emissions going up over time. It's driven by the GDP growth, but also you're looking for the green option costing less than the carbon option. In these charts here, we see the blue, and so we see that happening with the blue. But generally speaking, with the oranges, the markets are not tackling these orange areas. Okay, why is that? Because if I reduce my own carbon dioxide emissions, I don't benefit. What I want is everybody else to reduce. So I'm not spending my own money to reduce my emissions. And so there's an incentive problem with respect to the non-blue areas in this graph. And the IPC people are kind of ignoring that. We do have some blue areas, great, but the orange areas are not being tackled due to the lack of incentive, meaning you don't benefit by reducing your own emissions. So that's a big problem. It seems to me like that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, because it's climate change that can be solved, but it all depends on how much money we want to spend, and we probably don't want to spend enough money to do much about it.
Well, let's say it's your money. Let's say Bruce can spend thousands of dollars and reduce his own emissions. He's not going to benefit from that.
Right.
Now, and what Bruce wants is 8 billion people to reduce their emissions. So he might encourage them. He may put some money into encouraging them to reduce, but as far as reducing his own emissions, he's not going to matter.
Yeah. Okay. Robert.
I yeah, I should have lowered my hand. I'm
Okay.
fine.
Yeah, I mean the problem with this interesting chart that you had there, Glenn, but it's potential, and who knows? And they keep doing these things, and they keep showing what the potential is, and people look at that as if it's actually going to happen. Anyway,
well, the economists, the economists have been saying for years that all that stuff, that's the blue stuff, and when they do estimates for carbon dioxide emissions going forward, the macroeconomic models say that we're not decarbonized.
No.
And their models are based on the idea that people do things that are in their best interest.
that's right.
And they don't. And so from that perspective, you get some decarbonization, but not enough to take care of the GDP growth.
Right.
So CO2 emissions goes up.
Right. That's yeah. And again, that's what the question comes down to how much we know where the temperature is going to go up, probably hit 2 degrees by 2040. What kind of world do we want to live in? And how much do we want to pay not to live in it?
Well, I think also if sea ice collapses and the average global temperature lurches forward 0.6 degrees C in a short period of time, and it starts to affect the Atlantic Ocean currents, and it starts to affect sea level rise, I think you could end up in a world with a real panic. I think right now is like the lull of the storm. I think now everything is easy. I think this is like the golden age. It's
right, we're lucky
that it's downhill from here.
Yeah, Iceland is now worried about the AMOC, so they just realized if the AMOC collapses, they're no longer a country.
Yeah. Well, also Europe, if you look at the latitude of Europe and go over to Canada and look at the climate that you have at the same latitude in Canada, it's very cold. And so the Europeans are concerned about that. And that's why the British in 2024, they put together a 56 million pound investment fund for solar radiation management research.
Right.
And that's in part because they're thinking, okay, Atlantic Ocean currents is doing a lot for England. And if you lose those, England's going to freeze over. So they're nervous.
Right. But the problem that, and I'm working, talking to people in that field, is that right now you're not even allowed to talk about geoengineering. So I was working on a call this afternoon, or a Zoom session earlier, where people are trying to figure out how do you change the conversation so people are at least willing to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm working on a video on that talks about geoengineering and I've been working on a way of talking about it. And I was thinking about referring to geoengineering as 3 knobs. You have knob number 1, which controls the carbon dioxide emissions on the planet. So that's 40 billion tons a year. Knob number 2 is sulfur dioxide emissions, which is from burning fossil fuel at ground level. And that's 70 million tons a year. The sulfur is in coal and oil. And then knob number 3 is the sulfur dioxide emissions at a high altitude. Yep. And in theory, you can turn one knob a little bit or turn the others. And then for the 3 knobs, you've got about 24 parameters. There's things like the global warming rate, the global warming temperature, the cost of the knob number 3. There's ocean acidification. There's all these parameters. And what I think about doing in the video is advocating that we have spend $1 billion a year to work on a model that tells us for the 3 settings for the settings on these 3 knobs, what the parameters are. So with a model, you have inputs, you have outputs. So the inputs are 3 knobs, and then the outputs are the 24 parameters. And then to develop the model, and I'm advocating for $1 billion a year to work on this model, you've got to do field experiments where you have airplanes spraying stuff into the atmosphere and then doing measurements, which cost money. So I was thinking about calling it something like the 3 knobs of our planet. And so instead of saying geoengineering is bad, the point is that we should be having scientists and engineers work on this model so that we know how to turn these knobs to get us out of a pickle.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I used to think that was a good idea. I'm now come to the conclusion that with geoengineering, we have to decide to do it. And once you decide to do it, you can dial back to any temperature you want to. So you don't really need to know how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to, whatever. You need to know if we do it, we can do anything we want to. So the question is, how do we convince people that we want to?
What I'm trying to do on the video is convince people not so much to do it. I was thinking about talking about 3 steps. One is working on the model, R&D. And then another step is building up operations, building your airplanes. And then the third step is operations, where you're flying operations and actually doing this. So what I want to do in the video is advocate for the step number 1, which is the R&D side, which is money to scientists and engineers to build up the model. And this decision about whether or not you're doing it or not, I'd say let's not even worry about that.
Yeah.
Let's just build up that model.
I think the Israelis, actually, an Israeli company has raised hundreds of millions of dollars to actually do some prototyping. So anyway, it's interesting. Anything else he wants? We talked with, I think Bob wanted to talk about planetary boundaries, some other stuff people want to talk about this evening. What are people's druthers this evening?
Also, I can talk a little bit about movie making. If anybody's interested in movie making.
Yeah, I didn't prepare anything for planetary boundaries. It's been one of my issues, though, and the climate change per se is only one of 8 or 9 other topics that are putting us in and it's not the only one we need to address and get some serious efforts going on.
Yeah, I sent around some links about different groups of papers and things like that, so people get interested in it.
Well, can you get us more depressed than what other things we ought to be talking about?
Not enough in the news for depression.
These challenges. I must say, I've been involved in a few of these, but trying to really figure out the whole ecosystem and all of what we're involved with and all the challenges is both challenging, interesting, and frustrating.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and part of it is the journey going on. Okay, what do we do? What do we want our take action? Ask your congressman to address climate change. What do you want him to do? What do you want him to do that's reasonable to have happen? And at this point, there's only one thing that they can do that's reasonable. That's geoengineering and adaptation. Get ready for, sea level rise over the long term is probably 10 to 15 meters per degree centigrade. Miami is going to be underwater a reasonable amount by 2 or 3 feet in the 60s. 100 years from now, it's going to be underwater.
Yeah, and the Navy figured that out in 1995 in terms of the risk to Norfolk Oceana Base, which is their major operations base.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, but they're ships, but you got to bring logistics to the ships somehow.
Have dry docks. And actually, weird thing, Norfolk is a triple whammy. Norfolk is getting raised from sea level rise because the glaciers were when the Laurentian ice sheet was over the North America and pushed the land down, and it's still rebounding a little bit for the glaciers having melted. You've got the normal sea level rise from glaciers and temperature, and as the Gulf Stream slows, the water being washed up to the shore, it's coming in the Atlantic. So they get about 3 times the normal sea level rise in Norfolk, and it doesn't. And the Pentagon doesn't care.
Well, they used to,
and they will in another 3 years, hopefully. Yeah, but so the question, one of the guys on the conference earlier this afternoon was saying, how do you start the conversation going? How do you what ways do you want to educate people so that we can make some decisions we'll be having to make in the next 20 or 30 years? How do we get the conversation on solar radiation management we can talk about it? And how do we start talking about adaptation?
Well, it seems that we only want to talk about it after there's a disaster, as opposed to trying to prevent them.
Yeah.
And we had a quiet uh, hurricane season this year. It's
In this country.
in this country, not in the Pacific Basin, but in the Atlantic Basin.
Or the Pacific Basin, the Philippines.
Yeah.
Philippines, right? Yeah.
They get about 20 hurricanes a year coming through there. They've really been swamped. It's been a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh,
With
well, you know,
heavier rains and more energy.
Yeah.
there's YouTube video, which is one way of communicating,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, a lot of people.
and there's filmmaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Yale Climate Communications Group has been doing a pretty solid job on communications or what might be needed. But one of the things I have kicked around and wondered about and explored a little bit is the whole idea of trying to get some gamification going to get the public eye. Just as, you know, there's the first person shooter and the various kinds of role-playing games is how do you gamify this so that you get the next generation taking roles as, you know, either uh, advocates or beneficiaries of different uh, types of interventions, or the people who want to play the eco-villains on the other side of it is to make it see how fast you can accelerate things. We've got the accelerationists who say, bring it on. We want to make all this happen faster.
Yeah, there's the guy who was at the meeting with HPAC, trying to get his name. Maybe it's in here. That's exactly what he's doing. He's trying to raise a bunch of money so that he can do some things for that. Oh, where's my? Huh. I can't find his name right now. I'll look it up. He's at the conference. But he's trying to raise a bunch of money, looking at do I do graphic novels? Do I get some people who can use AI to create some short-term videos? Do I do games? What are things that you can do? There was talk, Ellen brought it up. I'd forgotten about, not forgot about it, about 30 or 40 years ago, 30 years ago in Mexico, they decided they wanted to start having conversations about either women's rights or abortion or something social they wanted to change, to change the attitudes. And so they started a bunch of soap operas that every week would talk about this issue and gradually make people more aware of it. And that apparently that changed a lot of people's attitudes in Mexico. So what's come on, where is this thing here? HPAC. Here we go.
You mean we need Norman Lear and Archie Bunker to begin to,
Yeah.
talk about this? One of the things that I've been doing is talking about kitchen table economics with people. For
Mhm.
example, homeowners insurance, and that way you can talk to a denier and they still are suffering from homeowners insurance on cost increase and a few other things like that to at least get the conversation started. And, don't talk about the cause, at least I've not tried to talk about the cause, but just to say, okay, here's the temperature rise, here's where we are, but let's talk about homeowners insurance. Oh, well, yeah. And, you've got not only the rise, but certain areas it's going to be tough to get it. So what do you do about that? What happens to food prices and so forth? So that's a slightly different approach, but it goes back to the, sort of Tip O'Neill, all politics is local, and local for people is the kitchen table and it's their pocketbook.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one area I've had those conversations and had an interesting success with it was talking to someone who's in the insurance industry, who is a nuclear advocate, and pointing out that there is no commercial insurance available for nuclear power plants. And
Interesting.
what did she think of the ability of the federal insurance program's ability to rebuild a community or make a community whole if a nuclear plant has a problem along the scale of Chernobyl in their region?
Like almost out of 3 Mile Island. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well,
for
3 Mile Island was quite modest and didn't end up having that much of a problem. But Chernobyl is very much a real bad case.
Yeah.
So what I've been doing with solar radiation management communication is recently is I've been producing, well, I produced two videos that involve this, and one of them talks about air pollution, and this is the video. It says, "Can air pollution save the planet?" So it talks about how we already have air pollution from sulfur dioxide emitted at ground level of 70 million tons a year, but if we take 1/10 of that and instead of emitting it at ground level, emit it at a high altitude, then the hover time increases over 100-fold, which means that the total sulfur emissions stays the same, but we get more reflectivity. This costs money. So what we're looking at is moving air pollution, not adding air pollution. So this video talks about that. And there's another video called Reflecting Sunlight that just talks about how you can put stuff into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight to cool the planet. So these two videos is, making an effort to communicate solar radiation management. And I know a lot of people don't like solar radiation management, but with YouTube, you could put a video out and it's like they can't block you. I know there's university campuses that have, 10 years ago were saying, we don't want anyone giving a talk about this, but with YouTube, you can push forward.
Yeah, one of the things that I am concerned about is that it's not just the solar radiation, it's the CO2 currently in the atmosphere. And as more of it gets there, the rate of transfer of CO2 into the oceans, unless you happen to believe that they're going to get saturated and not absorb anymore. But the acidification and the consequence for fisheries and global food sources for coastal nations.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which even the World Economic Forum is recognizing as a huge risk driving migration and hence driving national stability issues.
Yeah.
And another thing is, we're talking about like what can be done about it. And Evelyn Wang was interviewed about 10 days ago. She's a climate vice president for MIT. She's asked, like, what is MIT doing for climate? She didn't really have anything new that she's doing as the climate vice president. So I was thinking, in theory, a team could be put together to identify the R&D that, if fully funded, would solve the entire climate problem. So that's a team that puts together a list of things to develop. And it may be billions of dollars worth of stuff, but that's an example of an ask. Because there's the question, what is an ask? If you're going to talk to the president of MIT or the climate vice president of MIT or a member of Congress, and you've got, let's say, a one-sentence ask, then what is that ask? And that's an example of an ask, which is a couple of alumni could say, gee, we're alumni and would like to meet like for 15 minutes or something via Zoom. Our ask is, would like to put together a team of alumni and faculty that put together a list. Maybe it's a couple pages of documentation that of things, if fully funded, would solve the entire problem. That would go way beyond MIT's capabilities because it could involve thousands of people, but at least it would be a potentially helpful in some way.
Yeah.
I think it would be very helpful to have that kind of a, whether it's you call it an aspirational wish list, but what is the Manhattan Project to solve climate change look like?
Well, it's electrify, electrify, electrify.
Well, okay,
That's
but with
basically
R&D,
it. So it's how do you make, and right now it's cheap enough. So you've got wind and solar it's cheap enough to do it. So the only way to do it is you've got to ramp up the production of solar panels and wind turbines and to get them installed, connected to the grid.
Right, and
That's
battery,
basically
and
it.
battery technology.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, Bruce, your top of your head looks great.
Yeah, sorry, sitting down someplace. There we
There you
go.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's basically, and there are other things you can do, but it's 90%, changing the primary energy from fossil fuels to something else. There's not much rocket science there really. But
Mhm.
I watched the thing on. Did any of y'all watch the thing on fusion a couple weeks ago?
Yes, yeah.
I came away with that from thinking it's still 30 years out.
It's
Hmm.
still 30 years out, and they are
Guys,
not addressing it's the other piece that Bruce, you might want to add into the conversation is decentralization. So getting away from centralized power sources, because the grid is definitely another weak spot. Even if we had
Mhm.
magic fusion sources, we don't have a grid that can make that accessible.
yeah, yeah. I thought their thought on fusion was don't count on it before the 2060s. So, well, okay. And also it's interesting that he showed a number of graphs where it was either anywhere from 20% to 80% of electric power, depending on what's going to cost. And everybody assumes it could be free just about, but apparently it's not.
Have you priced out exotic materials lately?
Oh, you think things that are incredible and the plasma that they containment vessel for a plasma, right?
How
I
about
don't
the
think
high temperature superconductor ribbons?
yeah.
Uh,
I don't really ever see it coming. I see it's just too technologically complicated. It's
Mhm.
it's nuclear power is one thing. Fusion is just too complex.
Yeah. Gents, what was the program?
MIT,
Oh,
was it Northern California or who was it?
I think it was
yeah.
sponsored by Northern California, but it should be available on the alumni channel.
Thank
Right.
you.
So I thought that was interesting. So that yeah, it's in theory, if you had free electricity from fusion, then that would help your carbon dioxide removal kind of stuff. But I just don't. It's the problem I've also seen before. I've said many times is we're looking out too far. It's the next 15 years that are going to make all the difference, and just need to figure out how to get to the next 15 years successfully. Well, that's it. It's make or break. Anyway. Sorry, and John, I know it is kind of discouraging. Um, the only advantage you and I have, John, is that it's hopefully not going to happen in our lifetimes.
Right.
Just coming back to Glenn's point about what Evelyn Wang is doing or not doing. I like the idea, but who is advising her, and why would she listen to alumni rather than you know
It seems that there was a group of various faculty, different departments. So they were looking at uh, ports and shipping was number two.
Yeah, right. Sea
Uh,
level rise. I saw that. Says, are you kidding? You're talking about doing some of the ports and sea level rise? Come on.
wow.
yes, well, we're chuckling of that. And the third was data centers, uh, which I mean, it's my impression, and I could be very wrong. They're just extrapolating from the vision of data centers today. And they haven't put a lot of time and effort into how do you make them much more energy efficient or make the LLM processes today much more data efficient. They're just it's a battle for AI supremacy and the assumption that winner takes all. So everybody wants to build maximal resources. And there's if and when we ever get quantum computing right out there with fusion. Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you like to talk about two film ideas quickly? Maybe a couple minutes.
sure.
Well,
Okay.
wait a minute. David, were you going to say something? Oh, yeah.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
So and so the Evelyn Wang was asked, what about a moonshot? And she said, no, we're not doing that. But okay, so here's a film idea. And it's called the climate moonshot. It says 50 years after Kennedy's call to reach the moon, a new generation of scientists argues that the same spirit of focused innovation can save the planet from climate change. Climate moonshot follows engineers and visionaries racing to launch coordinated research surge that can make clean energy cheaper than fossil fuels. So that's 24/7 clean energy. And so this is a documentary, and it sort of focuses on what happened in 1961, and then a surge of funding can go into key areas. And so this is a 2-page summary of sort of things that can be done that are not being done. And so that's one film idea that's being worked on. And the other one is this right here is a fictional work. And this is featuring, it says here, a brilliant MIT freshman and her classmates. This says 18-year-old freshmen discover the world's leaders are catastrophically wrong about climate change. National policies focus on reducing carbon dioxide emissions, decarbonization. However, harm comes from global warming, and warming is primarily caused by 150 years of past emissions, melting sea ice, thawing permafrost, etc. In other words, national leaders are trying to solve the wrong problem. With the help of MIT faculty, the freshmen come up with a plan, set up a new laboratory, and task it with solving the entire climate problem with a surge of R&D in key areas. Yet what areas? Join them as they canvass the campus in search of the ultimate climate solution. So this is another film that's being worked on.
Yeah, so if only there were a silver bullet that we could get. It's not. There's
That's
no
one thing that's well established. There is no silver bullet.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's not. There's no and another problem is, what does solving the climate problem mean? Does it mean limiting the temperature? How do you what does it mean if someone's solving it? Well, they're reducing emissions, which bring the temperature down. So it's mostly how do you bring a temperature down, and what's reasonable to get down to?
Well, there's the IPCC has these so-called scenarios, and they've got some of them where the average global temperature just keeps going up, and then they have other scenarios where it goes up, it peaks, it comes back down. So I think if it just goes up, that's bad, and if it peaks and comes back down, that's pretty good. And that's based on global climate models, but also you have the tipping point models, and a tipping point model for sea ice would say that if you lose your sea ice, the average global temperature will lurch forward, and then you'll lose snow and ice on Greenland, then you'll lose your Atlantic Ocean currents, and all sorts of bad things happen. So if you focus on that, the tipping points and the cascading tipping points, then an example of a goal would be to prevent the activation from the first major tipping point, that is, prevent the activation or the collapse of sea ice.
Yeah, the problem is that I don't think there's anything we can do right now to avoid the loss of the Arctic sea ice. The most models and things have it happening 2040 to 2050, having a summer ice-free summer.
So you've got an average global temperature increases by 0.6 degrees C if you lose the North Pole sea ice, because then sunlight, instead of reflecting off that sea ice, would be absorbed by seawater.
Yeah,
so you're at 1.5 degrees C global temperature increase today, then you add 0.6 in a short period of time, that'll jump up to 2.1 in a short period of time.
Yep.
Now there's a paper by Wake Smith that says if you do solar radiation management, if you spray sulfur dioxide above 60-degree north latitude, you can prevent the collapse of the sea ice.
Yeah,
according to this paper.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of discussions about that. We have to decide. You've got to make a decision to try it. You got to see what happens. But that's what we're working toward. Any thoughts for what you all might want to talk about next time? Another conversation, or open mic, or just general chat, or any particular topics you'd like to cover?
Well, I thought Robert could give us 8 or 9 more things to worry about. I mean, I do appreciate this. Really, it's absolutely important that we all understand this stuff.
Well, I think John Rockstrom and his group at the
Potsdam Institute.
Potsdam Institute, which is partially migrated to a Swedish group as well, have done a pretty thorough job of laying out the story and some of the associated risks. Because the other problem is they don't occur in isolation. They end up cascading or amplifying against each other. So solving one by itself is, you could think of it as necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah.
Right? That's how I think about it.
Yeah. And the problem is there's no, unlike climate change, there's no like COP, there's no organization. Well, not true. Out there trying to solve these sort of things, for the phosphorus and the other stuff like that. There's just problems. We're just fouling our nest, and no one seems to really care.
Right. I mean, it's like the problems, as sea level rises, we're losing productive agricultural land because seawater is going up the estuaries and poisoning the groundwater.
Right.
Yep. Already happening. And from my understanding, catastrophic sea level rise cannot be prevented. It's going to happen.
I would not I would not try to argue the other side of that question.
Question of when, not if.
Yeah.
So we got a 3-page proposal at the United Nations right now, and the proposal states that proposes setting up the United Nations Climate Laboratory, and the goal is to prevent the collapse of the sea ice, which then would hopefully prevent sea level rise.
Yeah.
And that proposal was placed on the desk of the most powerful person on the world when it comes to climate change. He's the Secretary General, and then there's the assistant responsible for climate change. So it's that guy's desk that got this proposal. It was placed on his desk like 10 days ago. And then he said, "Oh, I have to go to the COP30 conference." And he said, "I'll read it when I get back." Yeah. So his staff, he supposedly is supposed to read this thing.
Yeah, but it's too late. You got between Thwaites and Greenland and that sort of stuff, where catastrophic sea level rise is going to be over 2 or 3 feet, and you can't prevent it. Nothing you can do to prevent it.
Wow.
Okay, listen, I gotta go.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Sounds good.
All right, yeah, very good.
That's
Thank
nice
you.
enough. I think it's good time to quit. So same time, same place. We'll let me know if you come up with some topics. We can, or just have a general discussion. It's always fun.
Okay, and you're going to do the you're going to review your What If Explorer on Monday morning?
Yes, yeah, that's going to be Monday morning, 11 o'clock. Yes.
Okay, great.
Talk some more about that. Okay, thanks everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Next month. Yeah, what's December? So that's December 11th.
Okay, see everyone then.
Okay, bye-bye.
Right. Bye-bye.